Well, growing up in the Bronx was easy, but everyone had it easier years ago. There was much more freedom. I didn't like New Jersey when I moved here. I was used to city living, easy transportation, and a friendliness that I didn't find. I don't bother with most of the people here, which is a terrible thing to say. It's independent living, and yet there's a sense of security. The building is locked up at night, and my car is I call down for my car, and I have a lot of freedom.
Oh, okay. And then
It's my property. It's my home. The halls are mine also.
what made you
Well,
want
I've always had responsibility. I've been responsible since I'm 3 years old, and I've always believed in volunteerism. I feel you have to give back. I really enjoyed on being part of the interfaith clergy of Maplewood and South Orange for the Holocaust. And I'm still on that committee, although I haven't been. Last year I was sick for almost the entire year, so I wasn't as active as I was in the past. When Len was alive, we always printed the programs, and we're meeting. There's a meeting Monday night. Um, we always met at Seton Hall. I was on the board of the Sister Rose Steering. I think that's another accomplishment. One of the founders of the Sister Rose Steering Foundation of Seton Hall. And I was honored 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I have it inside as a founder uh, for Sister Rose. And Seton Hall really didn't like her very much, you know.
out of retirement?
She gave Seton Hall a hard time. They gave her, or they gave her a hard time. I mean, um, she was very demanding because Seton Hall is run by the Archdiocese of Newark. I'm sure you all realize that because you're students there. Most people don't realize. They think it's just a Catholic university, but it isn't. And we found out the hard way. Anytime the endowment needed money for a brunch or a main function, we had to go to the Archdiocese for our own money. And two Jewish men between them gave $3 million for the Sister Rose Steering chair that's endowed. I mean, Yale gets $2 million for a chair. Seton Hall got $3 million from two Jews, and Rabbi Brill is the head of that department. Sister Rose added on to Pope John the 23rd encyclical to the church without anyone really realizing it, that after reading the book, studying for the nunhood, that the Jews were not to blame for the blood of Jesus. And she interpreted it entirely different, and that part of the encyclical was included, and it was taken out of the teachings of the church. Was a remarkable woman. She really was. I'll tell you a funny story about her. She called one night and she said, "Len, my television's not working." That was my husband. And she was living on Summit Avenue in West Orange at the time. And he said, "Well, what do you want me to do, sister?" He said, "Adam's home now. He's visiting." And Adam went up and he fixed the TV and he came home and he said, "Well, now I could say I was in a nun's bedroom." So, you know. She was just a remarkable woman. She wore a medallion that only, was hers. It was a combination of a cross and a Jewish star intertwined in solid gold, and she never took it off. She was very private about her. She's very close to Dr. Bosman, who's still there. He's the Reverend Dr. Bosman, but he's no longer a priest. And it was very interesting, all the meetings and the fundraising and trying to put forth what she felt was appropriate for the world and the kindness she showed everyone.
She sounds amazing.
Pardon me?
She sounds amazing.
She was an amazing woman. And once she started talking, she never stopped. I wanted to be a social worker, and I only went for a couple of years. My parents said, "Now it's time." My brother came back from Korea, and he went and graduated. I'm a New York person. I think New York. I don't think New Jersey. I cross the street like I'm in New York. I don't worry about the traffic. They'll have to, But the village is wonderful. My brother lived on McDougal Alley, which is around the corner from, NYU. Of course, it's expanded since. Now my granddaughter's there getting a master's degree in social work.
Oh, was it frustrating?
Angry.
Angry.
Well, that was my role in my parents' home. In a Orthodox Jewish family, the son takes preference over anything else. It's called a Kaddish person that says, and he doesn't believe in anything. He's an atheist and an agnostic. And that's just how it was growing up.
Was your relation? You were 3.
Well, I was responsible for my brother. He was an asthmatic. And I once asked my mother, why was I responsible for, So, I think that's why I've always cared about children, because I really don't feel I had a childhood. So you try to give back what you know. Well, in the early, in my early 20s, I became a big sister for Jewish Federation of New York. I was looking through the letters before. I just always loved children, and I always felt a need to help somebody else. Well, my father was not Orthodox, and he was an absentee parent. My father worked nights, so he came home 3 o'clock in the afternoon and went to sleep, and then got up at 11 and went to work. And we had dinner on Sabbath, Friday night dinner. That was it. My mother was warm and loving, and always cooking, or always at the sewing machine. I envision her, I visualize her at the sewing machine. But my life then, compared to children growing up now, you can't even compare it. The freedom we had. We went out for the day. Came home from school, changed our clothes, and went out. My mother didn't see me till dinner time. And we didn't worry about it. I walked a mile to rent a bike for $0.25 to ride for 2 hours on a bicycle. Well, first of all, we didn't have the awareness of that there were pedophiles or people that it never dawned on anyone. And also people cared about each other more. There was a feeling of community. I don't feel that now. Well, I went to an all-girls high school, which was very beneficial. Nobody cared if you had makeup on. Nobody cared what you wore. And that's why I'm a true believer in uniforms for school children, because they're made fun of. We never had bullying. I hope you girls, ladies, read the book, The Color of Water, because water has no color. And I made my granddaughters read it. And I grew up with that attitude. There was no color barrier. Oh yeah, I told a girl I was friendly with that I couldn't be her friend. I didn't like the way she behaved. And she said, "You have to be." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to be." And she slapped me in the face. That's being opinionated, yes. I do have one terrible dislike for people that are judgmental. I honestly will not tolerate anyone that will judge me or anyone else. They don't have that. Nobody has that right, because they don't know what that person is feeling or thinking or has gone through. My mother said, "How could you marry him? He's so heavy." And I said, "Mother," and I was, like this. And but he became the son they always wanted, even though they had 2 sons. He was very caring, warm, generous, kind person.
Did you guys come from the same type of background, or was his background completely different?
Completely different.
Oh, okay.
He grew up in West Orange, went to private prep school, got a full scholarship to Cornell, and a year later transferred to Carnegie Tech, which is now Carnegie Mellon.
Did you?
Well, he was very intellectual, very outgoing, warm, caring. He was my best friend. The only thing my husband Len insisted upon, he felt cheated that he was never bar mitzvahed. I don't know why that there was such a strong feeling for him. and he didn't own a tallis, the prayer shawl, and my mother went and bought him one. And my oldest nephew was being bar mitzvahed shortly after, and my brother gave him what they called him to the Torah in Aliyah, and now my mother said, now that's the equivalent of a bar mitzvah once you're called to the Torah. This is my favorite. Len had that, the girl with it reminds me of me as a child. Very sad. Never felt I fit in anywhere. So, I had to make a life for myself. The backgrounds are similar in the respect that he was a Reformed Jew and I was an Orthodox Jew, and I didn't believe in Orthodoxy, and I didn't. Out of respect for my parents, when my mother came, I would use glass plates for them, and use tin, those tin things that you cook in, and make fish for her, because I didn't keep a kosher home. I felt it was, for me, it wasn't necessary.
What was it about
Because
it?
I feel that in the times of when they used pottery for dishes, it was a porous object, and they don't mix the meat and the dairy. There has to be 6 hours between, after you have one, that you could have the other. But in today's society, glass is acceptable. So if glass is acceptable 50 years ago, then why do you need 2 sets of dishes and everything? 2s. We decided to get married 6 weeks after we met.
So the two of you had 3 children?
Yes.
Okay, what are your children's names?
The oldest is Jeffrey Bennett Jacobs. He hates that. And you want to know about him? He has, he's a special ed teacher. He was in business with my husband, but my husband died very suddenly. He had never been ill, and he just dropped dead. Jeff chose not to continue the business. He said he wanted to go back to school and be a teacher, and he got his degree in education. Then he decided special ed, and he went back and got a degree in special ed. He teaches at the Craig School, and because private schools are not mandated to give benefits, he works evenings and all day Saturday at Apple, and they give all the benefits he needs. My middle son is Adam, and he's unusual. He's a typical middle child. He lives in Virginia, and he went into teaching now, and he's also an Uber driver on the weekends. He loves it. He loves the freedom of the road. My daughter is a year younger than Adam. She's Anne, and she married, maintained her Jake. Well, my mother never worked. Well, she did my mother came to this country from Austria when she was 15, and she worked on the next block of the Triangle Shirt Factory fire. She was a seamstress. She never worked after marriage. In those years, most women didn't. They were, homebodies. My father had an extremely strong work ethic. His father left him and his siblings. He had to go to work at 9, and his first job was delivering bags of coal in tenements in Brooklyn for $5 a bag. So my father raised us, and it really stayed in the back of my mind about finance. If you can't afford to own it, you can't afford to buy it. And that always stayed with me. Years ago, they still have it, but the clergy aren't as involved. It was the South Orange Maplewood Interfaith Holocaust Committee. And my job, I would go around and get every clergy that was involved. 1 year it's in a church, 1 year it's in a synagogue. And I think coming up it's going to be in Morrow's this year. It was terrible. I had one cousin, and the only one she would go to was my parents' home. And she lost 11 brothers and sisters, her parents, and all her nieces and nephews. It was the only portion of my mother's family that did not come here. My father was born here, and so was his father. but my mother's side of the family came from Europe, Eastern Europe,